Hello, I'm American Joe Metashevsky, Government Affairs Director for Old Line Government Affairs. Brett?
My name is Brett Leininger, with Old Line Government Affairs and of counsel to the Nemphos Law Firm. Welcome to the webinar on Maryland's budget during COVID and implications for 2020 and beyond. Just a quick word about the firms before we get into some introductions. Nemphos is a corporate boutique law firm with extensive business and legal experience supporting clients' companies' needs throughout the entire life cycle of a client's business, from development and acquisition to commercialization, licensing and monetization to protection and disposition. And Old Line Government Affairs, as a subsidiary of Nemphos is the preeminent government affairs consulting firm in Maryland. We are a bipartisan strategic partner helping clients navigate state and local governments with the aim to obtain their goals and objectives in a tangible way. We have a proven track record of success for our clients, whether it is to help them to do business with governmental entities or defending their competitive advantage through the legislative and/or regulatory processes. And with that, we'll have Joe set the stage.
Thanks, Brett. Well, first of all, we want to thank our panelists and our audience for joining us today to discuss Maryland's budget situation at a time when we're experiencing the worst pandemic since 1918 and the most significant contraction in our economy since the Great Depression. We are very pleased to have distinguished legislators with us today on our panel at such a critical time in the state's history. I understand that Chairwoman McIntosh is on the webinar, but we're unable to see her. But I will do her introduction and then hopefully we'll get some video of the chair shortly. But Delegate Maggie McIntosh is chairwoman of the House Appropriations Committee. She's the former chair of the House Environmental and Transportation Committee. She served as Deputy Majority Whip and has been a member of the House since '92, but she was first elected in 1994. Chairwoman McIntosh is a former school teacher and administrator in Baltimore City Schools and at Catonsville Community College. Brett, you want to introduce Chairman Gazzone?
Sure. Chairman Guy Gazzone of the Senate Budget Taxation Committee. He has been chairman since 2020 and a member of the committee since 2015. Chairman Gazzone was also the Senate Majority Leader 2019, the Majority Whip from 16 to 19. Prior to coming to the Senate, he was elected to the Maryland House of Delegates in 2006. And a member of the House from 2007 to 15. And we, with that, we can do an introduction, Joe.
Excuse me. Yes, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Delegate Wendell Beitzel. He's from Maryland. Delegate Wendell Beitzel was first elected to the Maryland House of Delegates in 2006. He was a member of the House Appropriations Committee since 2009, and he was also on the House Health and Government Operations Committee. Delegate Beitzel was also Deputy Minority Whip from 2015 and 2018. Welcome, Madam Chair.
Hi, thank you.
I don't know if you heard your introduction.
I did. It was great. It was great.
Thanks for joining us. Right now, we're going to switch, and I know you just popped on, but if each of you, the chairs and Delegate Beitzel, just give us a little brief introductory remarks to our viewers. We have a lot of people online today, and they're looking forward to hearing from you.
Why don't we let the Senate go first? I'm still breathing heavy from trying to get into the Zoom meeting.
Okay, we'll do that. All right.
Happy to take the lead, and the only reason I know how to lead is because I spent so many years on your committee.
Thank you.
I think the thing to try to remember, and I keep telling, I've done a number of these calls that I try to set the stage, is that we have to think about budgets in multi-year process. doing anything other than that is problematic. It doesn't give the full picture of where we are. I can go into some excruciating detail, which I won't at this point, but to say simply, the good news is we come out at the 20 budget in good shape. We go into the 21 budget, and because of a number of factors, we're in better shape than we thought we'd possibly be. And that in particular, we thought we would have a $2 billion problem or so in that year. And now we're looking at maybe an 8, maybe even as low as a $600 million problem. Still a problem. I've been around long enough, and my judgment is that when we have a couple $100 million problem in any given year, we can usually figure it out with pain, but reasonably. Anything in the $500 million arena, which we clearly are in 21, it starts to become really real. And then sort of that's the good news. And then the bad news is that we're still looking at a $3 billion problem for 22. So if you can imagine, we essentially in this 9-month, maybe a full year period, have to deal with 3 budgets, of which one is good, one is not great, but we should be able to get through, and the other is really beyond some levels of comprehension, and we're going to have to deal with that. So that's sort of the overview as I see it.
Okay, let's get over to Delegate Wendell Beitzel for a while, and then when Chairwoman McIntosh is ready, we'll let her wind it up. Wendell, go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me to be on this today. It's kind of really a pleasure for me to be on with such distinguished members of the Maryland General Assembly as Chairman Maggie McIntosh and with the Chairman of Budget and Tax, Guy Gazone. Guy and I go back quite a ways. We come in, I think, the same year, but before that, he was a county council person and I was a commissioner in Garrett County, and we served on MACO together. And we were on the board at MACO. So, and then Guy, of course, served on appropriations, where he was a great member of that committee. And it's fitting that he's now a chair of Budget and Tax over in the Senate. So, and my chairman, I have utmost respect for, and it's always a pleasure to be on, and an honor to serve with her on these kind of things. And so, I want to say that. So, thank you for inviting me. And kind of what I would say is one of the biggest problems facing us going into the next. Can you still hear me?
Yeah. The screen got.
Yeah. Can you still hear me?
Yes,
we can.
Okay. All right. So anyway, I think one of the biggest problems we're going to have to deal with in this year's session is how are we going to hold the session? We're going to have meetings in the Capitol and in our session rooms, and how we're going to hold the committee meetings. And we're hearing, and this, of course, the leaders are going to have to decide all this, and they're working on that. And I've been getting bits and pieces of how that's going to go. I think for the lobbyists, it's going to be a real uncertainty of whether or not you're even going to be able to go to committee rooms, where you're going to be allowed in the Capitol building. And so you guys have some real problems in how to deal with us. And certainly we depend a lot on you. I use the lobbyists for resources. You guys become real experts on things. And when we have legislation and things, I often go to you for questions. And so I think our biggest session is how we're going to get into this next session and go into it. And then, of course, I think we on the House side get the budget first this year. And so having budget briefings and you guys being able to get in on those things are going to be a real question. So I kind of end it there, and we'll go into questions then later on in the budget.
Thank you, Delegate Beitzel. Chairwoman McIntosh.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here. Sorry about the little blip at first. I was on, I could see you, but you couldn't see me. Anyway, I think both the chair of Budget and Tax and the good delegate from Western Maryland have laid out probably the two biggest issues of this session, which is, you know, how do we tackle the budget, which is, as Senator Gazone said, Chairman Gazone said, it's better. We'll have an easier time this year than we had expected, but still budgets are a marathon. They're not a sprint. So we have to look at them in that respect. And there will be, I'm sure, many changes in the way we conduct business this year, because we do want to keep the public safe. We want to keep ourselves safe and our families and your families safe. So I am sure that we will enter the session with probably some distance between the public and us. It's not the way we want to do business, but it is the way we will. But there will be access for everybody who wants to have a meeting and wants to be able to talk to their legislator. I concur with what the chair of Budget and Tax said about the depth of the problem that we face due to COVID. I'd add two things. At some point during this discussion, I'd like to talk a little bit about my historic perspective, having lived through now 3 of these deep recessions. How I think we should approach it. It's my opinion, but you know, I think we have learned from some of the mistakes or side errors made in the past about approaching these difficult times, and we want to approach them so that we don't add to the problem, that we actually invest and grow ourselves out of the problem as much as we can. But still noting that we have a constitutional duty to balance a budget, and we have a AAA bond rating, and we're going to protect that. The other thing that I might add is that we are uncertain about what's going to be happening with COVID. Will there be a vaccine? Will there not? We don't know. We hope there will be. But, you know, we don't know if there's going to be a second wave or no wave. And so there's so much uncertainty, I think, that, you know, we are facing at this time. But we're going to proceed in a cautious and prudent way, and we're going to do the same thing with the budget. I think one of the things that, you know, I would like to see is just more, as we did last year, to get out as quickly as we did. I think we probably should enter this next session with as much and the kind of great cooperation we had between the Senate and House budget committees to make sure we get through and do our due diligence. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We appreciate that. I'm going to throw this back to Brett now. He's going to give us a little background on the budget, and then we'll get to our questions.
Great. Thank you, Joe. And thanks to everyone for the opening remarks. It really sets the stage. For those in the audience who may not be familiar with the process, I'll just spend a couple of minutes to go through how things work in Maryland. The fiscal budget year runs from July 1st through June 30th of each year. Maryland has a strong executive model where the governor creates the budget and supplements it thereto. The Department of Budget and Management, DBM, under the budget secretary supervises the executive budget making process, and the state legislature may only cut or restrict funds in the budget, which I'm sure presents challenges for the panelists. The budget process starts about 15 months prior to the start of the fiscal year. DBM provides budget instructions to the state agencies so they can prepare their individual budgets. And throughout the fall, the agencies submit their budgets, budget requests to DBM, which in turn makes recommendations to the governor. Normally, final decisions are not made until the new year because the Board of Revenue Estimates does not provide its report until mid-December. And also in December, the legislature's Spending Affordability Committee, which advises the governor as to its spending limit, provides its annual report. And pursuant to Maryland's Constitution, the budget is to be submitted to the legislature by the third Wednesday in January, or the 10th day of the legislative session if it is the first year of a new term of office. And with that, I'll kick it to Joe.
Thank you, Brett. Each of our guests have a great deal of experience and probably have been able to compare Maryland's process to other states. And I would ask each of them if they would offer their perspective and impressions on how Maryland's budget process works well and at times not so well. So if we could start with Chairman Gazzoni, then Chairwoman McIntosh, and Delegate Beitzel, just a little bit on how well it works and at times not so well, the challenges and the bumps in the road.
So I think it works well in a lot of ways. Clearly, the legislature over many decades has been very thoughtful in setting up procedures, rainy day funds, ways of dealing with capital gains, fluctuations over time, different things to ensure that we have a good system. Embedded in our system, though, is something that creates a structural deficit pretty much every year. And that is reported to the public and can be confusing because in reality, it is not a true deficit. It is as one of my former colleagues said, an aspirational budget. In other words, it reflects what we think should happen, what we'd like to spend our resources on. But at the end of the day, constitutionally, we're required to have a balanced budget. And we always do. And so it gives a false impression. And it also sets up some false or some difficult relationships with the governor in terms of how we can accomplish goals and values that I believe are shared across Maryland. And that the nature of that is embedded in creating so-called mandates. We can't add to the governor's budget in any given year, but we can essentially force him to include monies in a subsequent year, but we have to, of course, be able to pay for it. So it can be cumbersome. It can create a situation where there's misperception. And quite frankly, it is unique to Maryland. And so we have actually passed and are putting before the voters a constitutional amendment this year to change that process to put it more in line with what the rest of America does. And that is give the legislature to change funding on programs within the budget, within an overall dollar amount. And I think it makes infinite sense. I think it will make things less cumbersome. It will allow us to respond more quickly and more deliberately to problems as they come up, immediately come up. And I'm hopeful that the citizens will vote for that change. It will make the job a lot easier, a lot less complicated, and a lot clearer to the public about what is really going on and what values, because budgets are really about values, what values are expressed every year and ongoing by the legislature, being the closest to the people and being able to understand the needs of our population. So I think there is that room for that significant improvement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. I'm sure the audience does as well. Madam Chair, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. And again, to Senator Chairman Gazon, you ended with absolutely something that I wanted to talk about, and that's the constitutional amendment that's before us. Let me just say that the budget process in Maryland, is kind of frustrating to some of us because, we look at it 6 years out, okay? So when you're looking at this year and how much, we are short this year because of COVID, it also looks at it 5 years out from that. Well, how many of you can have a stockbroker that predicts 5 years out for you, and it's very difficult to make those predictions. So what Senator Gazan said is absolutely correct, that it's almost like when we show these deficits going out, these are aspirational budgets almost. And we have really little ability, as does anybody, to predict revenue intake 6 years out, 5 years out, 4 years out. What's more predictable is the here and now and over the next year, let's say. So I think, that's one thing that is and has been frustrating about chairing appropriations and trying to explain to my constituents and to the public that this, big number out there is actually could in fact evaporate if revenues come in better than expected. And in fact, we've witnessed that. I would tell you that right before COVID hit, one of my prouder moments delivering the budget on the floor was this year when the minority whip, a very conservative, wonderful woman from Baltimore County, Harford County, stood up and said, I just want to say that I'm going to vote for this budget. This budget eliminates the structural deficit going out X number of years. She was thrilled with the reserves that we kept, thrilled with, the budget, and literally, quite literally, she was very complimentary of the work we have done. So, that happens, and then COVID happens, and here we are. So it's unpredictable. It is sometimes not easy to gauge. I do want to end by saying that the constitutional amendment does two things I think that are very important. One, it does not give the legislature full authority over the budget. It maintains the very strong gubernatorial executive budget process. But it does give us a small percentage of the budget. If we find money or if we find cuts, we can then shift those monies or those cuts to priorities that we may have. And we can respond to events like COVID because of that. The other is it gives the governor something new in his toolbox or her toolbox. It gives them line item veto over something in an item in the operating budget, which they currently do not have. And so I think it's a great check and balance. And as been stated, this brings us in line with 49 other states. Some other states have, legislatures have far more authority than we are asking for. We're asking for a tiny bit, not a big bit. And we're giving the next governor, which is when this will take effect, a line item veto in the operating budget, which I think is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Beitzel.
Yeah.
Your comment.
Well, it's a whole lot easier to govern when you have a good economy. And serving through the Governor O'Malley years, he had a much rougher time when he had the housing bubble, and so
yeah.
It's during those years we had structural deficits almost every year. We had the revenues that weren't coming in as necessary to meet expenses, but we made it through those years, and I have to give it to Governor O'Malley and to the minority leaders that it was a rougher time to deal with then. In the last 6 years, we've been dealing with a budget situation that we've had slow budget growth, but we had virtually very little structural deficits, and essentially none. And we had years when there was no BRFAs. And so without the BRFA, there wasn't any need to have to go back and correct the prior fiscal year deficits that weren't there. At least they were minor. But one year I recall that we had this General Assembly put in a BRFA just so that they could influence, provide more influence on how the budget was finalized. And I'm not sure that worked out exactly as expected, but we have the BRFA to adjust things. And a lot of times the BRFA, in my view, has been used to do things that, like taking away the highway user revenue for all the counties and things that really hurt the rural areas of the state. And so I think the budget process works really well, and we have the conference committees that work out the differences between the House and the Senate. And I've been fortunate enough, and McIntosh has appointed me that. And so that in itself has been a real way to deal with the differences between the two chambers. And we work through it, we muddle through it, but we always get through it. And one of the things, as was mentioned previously, that we do have a balanced budget requirement in Maryland. I think that's really critical and important. And so we have to deal in these tough times. And then what we're looking at now, we're back into a situation that we have to deal with the situations where revenues aren't coming in as expected. But we'll get through it, and we'll work through it. And as is always the case, even if there's huge structural deficits, because of that balanced budget requirement, we will end up with a balanced budget when we get done with session. So,
thank you, Delegate Beitzel. I appreciate that. We're going to have Brett just give us a quick stroll through the COVID-19's impact on the budget. So Brett, I'll throw it over to you.
Thank you, Joe. Back in April and May, the budget projections was that due to COVID, Maryland faced between a $2.1 and $2.6 billion deficit in FY21. I'm sure you guys will correct me if I don't have the numbers exactly right. Based on that information, on July 1st, the Board of Public Works cut about $413 million of the $612 million proposed by Governor Hogan. Just a bit of a brief background for the benefit of the audience. The Board of Public Works is made up of the governor, the comptroller, and the treasurer. Under Maryland law, in addition to what the Board of Public Works is approving state contracts, $200,000 and more, under Maryland law, subject to certain exceptions, with the approval of the Board of Public Works, the governor may reduce by not more than 25% any appropriation that is subject to the budgetary reductions required under the budget bill as approved by the General Assembly. And the board elected to wait until September to take up those additional cuts to allow for the 2019 tax returns to come in. As we referenced before, the picture was a bit better. The governor has stated that he hopes to avoid layoffs and furloughs of state employees to fill the budget gap. Other states have already taken such measures. The numbers, as Chair McIntosh referenced, look better, but the outgoing years could be problematic. The Maryland Matters reported that the comptroller's office attributed some of the good numbers to Maryland having a strong presence of federal jobs, which is often discussed, and I think a true statement in Maryland. Big increase in the sales and use tax revenue from online sales, which was legislation from a couple of years ago. $100 million of that going to the general fund. But the full impact, additionally, the full impact of the pandemic not having fully hit in this last fiscal year, because it began towards the end of the fiscal year. So as was mentioned before, state revenue shortfalls are still significant, and many challenges ahead of us. And with that, we can kick off some Q&A, and I'll kick it over to Joe.
Thanks, Brett. Now we'll get into some questions and answers. There may have been some overlap on this, but I think it's important for everyone who is viewing today. Again, this is a very complex, the budget system is a very complex system. And for people that really aren't familiar with it, sometimes it takes a couple runs through the line here to understand. So my first question, and this is first for both of the chairs, Chairman Gazzoni and Chairwoman McIntosh, help our audience understand how the budget looked in Maryland prior to COVID hitting. And I think Chairwoman McIntosh mentioned it, things were moving along very smoothly, but if Chairwoman McIntosh, if you could go first, and then Chairman Gazzoni, just give us a kind of a profile of that.
Sure. Well, the legislature had done a couple of things over the last, let's say, 3 to 5 years prior that greatly enhanced, I think, Maryland's budget outlook. Number one, number two, number three being modernizing our sales tax collections. Up until about 2 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, I could go on Amazon and buy something online and not pay Maryland sales tax. Other states were collecting it, but we weren't. Then when Amazon, thank goodness, moved its facility here in Maryland.
Looks like she froze up. Maybe she'll bounce right back. Guy, you want to step in for?
I would never presume to finish the words of Chair.
Well, we were going to ask for your opinion anyways.
But here she is. She's back.
I'm sorry.
It
says my connection to the internet's unstable. Sorry about that. But anyway, so we began to collect the Amazon sales tax, but there were still a whole host of other companies like Overstock.com and so on and so forth, SD, I don't know who all, that we could go online and buy things and we weren't paying sales tax in Maryland. We closed that with the quote unquote Wayfair bill a couple of years ago. And what we have seen and what we saw last year, which made the budget coming into last year's fiscal year quote, easy for us, was that online sales were way outperforming any projections that we could have imagined. So I will say, too, as a preface for further questions down the line, if anything has changed in COVID with this pandemic, online anything is going to increase more.
Yeah.
I mean, telehealth is here.
Mm-hmm.
A number of digital platforms are here, and they're here to stay. And one of the things we did in last session, thanks to the leadership of the Senate, was we passed a couple of 3 bills that looked at capturing sales tax off digital imaging, not just digital sales, digital advertising. So my point is, and those, by the way, were vetoed. So those are vetoes that ought to be overridden.
Okay.
So again, I wouldn't be so presumptuous to fill the words in for the chair, but because in particular, I couldn't agree more. That sort of focus and understanding of the new economy has been critical and has made moving forward not only easier from a budgetary perspective, but just fair. I mean, at the bottom line is that these bills that have been done were about ensuring that the treatment to the brick and mortar stores out there and the new economy are treated in the same way. It is the right thing to do. I mean, quite frankly, as much as we all want and use the Amazons and online shopping and such, and that's a great thing, I know that I still want to go to my local stores in my community too. And to see that they succeed is important. And the way to do that was to make it fair all the way around. So that was a big component of it. And just simply to say, yeah, we
To
were.
delete all old messages, you have the Thursday, 11:30 Thursday.
Excuse me, Guy.
It's okay.
I'm trying to figure out how to shut that darn phone down. But
the budget, we walked out, prior COVID, in a good place, and in a place where we began to start thinking about, and we haven't really talked about this at all, Kerwin at all, on education funding, but we walked out believing that, and of course we set provisions within Kerwin to ensure if monies were not there, and of course we've seen now that they are not, as we expected, but we were in a place back then where we were actively thinking about how to take our educational system to the next level. And that was a great place to be in. I still think we have a lot of opportunity there. I think we're going to have to be careful and thoughtful, as I think we have been, but I think that's a place where we have to think, and we have to plan. We have to, and I'm going to let Maggie say this because I think she was already ready to start talking about this earlier, about how when we look across the country, the investments that we make in comparison to our other states and across the world, we should be thinking very creatively to ensure that those investments are done well, because we want to position ourselves for the long term. That's all I'm going to say about that. But the bottom line is we were in pretty good shape as we left session last year, or this year. It
Thank
seems
you
like
so
a
much.
year.
We are truly being treated to individuals who have a lot of experience, and that's just tremendous. It's coming through loudly and clearly. For the chairwoman, I just want to step back and ask about previous recessions, and particularly how has Maryland responded going through the Great Recession? Is there any parallel that we're seeing this time as opposed to, and I know there are lots of federal funds involved in this. We'll get to that as we move through today's webinar. But what are you seeing as far as any kind of parallel situation with that, the Great Recession?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start back further than that. I was sworn in to office to take in a special session, right before a special session, to really take a huge cut to our state budget, because we found ourselves in the early 90s in a recession and we had to adjust the budget. In the early 90s, we made mistakes, I believe. And I think most folks that served back in that time would tell you that we did. Here, we learned, and we should learn from that, how not to respond in this instance. One of the things that we did that was devastating, I believe, was we thought, well, we don't have general funds to fund the operating budget, so we got to cut all other budgets too, like capital. We cut back our capital budget even though we didn't need to. And we shrunk our capital budget along. So what did we do? We stymied our own growth. Capital budget projects equal jobs, period. And we cut school construction. We cut all of these capital programs back, and we never should. So lesson number one that we should learn is, if you have the capacity for your capital budget at X amount, spend it, because it will help you grow out of this. One of the things that hurt us in the early 90s was the fact that we did have a heavy dependence on federal employees and federal contractors. And the federal government was shrinking and cutting back and laying off people, and that was hurtful. This time, we're not seeing that, but we can't also predict the future either, what the federal government will do to resolve their budget issues. So we're always vulnerable in that area. In the Great Recession, which actually Delegate Wendell already mentioned, the years when Martin O'Malley had to work us through that. I mean, he did a couple of things. One, yes, he got the federal government money, but he also increased revenues. He increased revenues. He had the nerve to actually put forth several revenue packages that helped us offset cuts, because he and the leadership at the time were very dead set on not harming education, public health, public safety. I mean, those were the three tenets that we protected. And I will go back to what Guy has just mentioned, the Kirwan Commission. I mean, if there's any population in the state of Maryland, in this country, that I can say 100% of that group have been harmed by COVID, it's school kids, 100% of them. And right now we have other countries that we compete with whose kids are in classes because their infection rates are below 1%. And we have to figure out over the next 5 to 10 years a way to catch our kids back up so they can compete. So the Kirwan bill was vetoed, and I do believe that there is a sense that we must override that veto, but we also must look at now Kirwan in light of what has happened with COVID. In other words, be realistic about phasing it in, but also be realistic about whether or not we have to make changes and build in incentives to get kids caught up quickly.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm going to turn this over to Brett now because I think he has a question. And
It's really fascinating perspective that you're both providing, all three of you are providing. So talking about this coming session, you may have touched on this already, Madam Chair. What do you see as being the biggest challenge with respect to the budget this upcoming session? You got a lot of moving parts here. Just off the top, maybe it's multiple things, but what are you focused on?
I mean, for me, and I believe, kind of a consensus that I hear growing from House leadership, although I'm never going to attempt to speak for everybody, but I do think there is a growing consensus that some of the vetoed items need to be looked at and overridden and maybe adjusted. And I'll give you one really good example. Because the Senate, my friends in the Senate, tied House Bill 1, which was our school construction bill, to the passage of Kirwan. When Kirwan got vetoed, so did House Bill 1, even though at the time the governor didn't, I don't even think, realize the impact that well, or at least they didn't realize that that was going to do away with House Bill 1. What's House Bill 1? It's a school construction bill, historic in terms of the number of dollars, the impact it'll have on every county in the state. It's jobs. What do we need the most coming out of this recession? Jobs. And so I think, trying to figure out how we do overrides, bring back our school construction bill, and bring it up and have it implemented, and figure out what priorities we must absolutely address in the budget. The digital divide is going to be a big issue. Police and policing, because of the emphasis that at least Speaker Adrian Jones has put on this, is going to be a big issue. And I do think we will be addressing all of those in this coming session.
Excellent. Thank you. Delegate Beitzel, are you still on?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'll ask you to, from your perspective, what do you see as being the biggest challenge?
Well, COVID-19 has added a great deal of uncertainty of where we're going to be when we go into session. The question of whether or not there's going to be even a vaccine available, and if a vaccine is available, things may change dramatically. A couple of things that Chairman McIntosh had mentioned, the bills that we'll be looking at for potential veto overrides, and one of those, obviously, as she mentioned, was the Kerwin Commission and the Kerwin bill. And if that's overridden, then we got to figure out if we're going to delay funding or how much funding or how's it going to be.
Absolutely.
One of the real problems that I see because of COVID, we have essential businesses and not essential businesses. Fortunately, and I think one of the reasons that we are where we are in Maryland now is that we do depend heavily upon the federal employment, and that we haven't been impacted as bad as some other states have because of that. And even the sales tax and other things that have been helped tremendously by the CARES Act and the PPPs and that additional money that was put out, consumers used that money and paid more sales taxes. So I don't think we're going to be in as bad a shape as we thought we were going to be some time ago, as Senator Gazone has mentioned. But the thing that really, where I'm at in my end of the state, that is really troublesome is when are we going to get to the point that businesses can open up and go back? And we're impacted tremendously out here because a lot of the restaurants and other things are considered non-essential businesses. And fortunately, we're getting now to the point that they're back up to 75%. And I think that will help increase revenue and also impact the unemployment situation in Maryland. And unemployment is a huge thing out here. And we got to look at, where's our money going to come from to continue to pay those people that don't have jobs, and how's that going to impact the budget? So we have a full slate of issues that we'll be dealing with, and hopefully we'll work through them and come out the other end at some point when this virus thing is solved and be in a position that we can get back to business as normal in Maryland.
Great. Thank you very much. Chairman Gazone?
I just try to be quick and just say there's something about what I've experienced since I've just been in the legislature. And you asked what's the most important thing that we're going to have to deal with, and the answer is everything. Yeah. And so I know on some levels that might sound like a cop-out, but on some levels it's one of the things that I'm most proud of over these last 15 years or so that I've been in the legislature, as I believe I've seen the legislature itself evolve into thinking holistically, recognizing that problems are completely tied to one another, that issues are, whether it's education and the kids not being able to get the appropriate learning right now, or mental health issues that develop because people are struggling, everything's tied together in various ways. People don't have a job. I mean, all of it together. And our job is a complicated one, but one that I think needs to be thought of, and as a group, as a holistic way of finding solutions that really work across the lines to make our society better and set the framework for the best society that we can create. Anything less than that, any laser focus on one thing or another, really, I don't think gets us to the place that we need to get. So it's everything.
Yeah, excellent. Great answers. Joe?
Thanks, Brett. I have a question for Chairman Gazone. The question's a little long, but I just want to set the stage for it. It's more a statement before the question, but it was noted during the Coronavirus Relief Fund briefing on September 3rd, for which both the Senate Budget and Tax Committee and the House Appropriations Committee were present there. And it concerns how the administration is spending the CRF, the COVID Relief Fund money. And they are spending it cautiously, I understand. But it was also stated during that the US Treasury guidance has been proven difficult to follow. And at times it's been contradictory. For example, and these are three things that I jotted down: the personal protective equipment purchases may not be eligible for those federal funds. The COVID relief fund dollars may not be swapped to FEMA expenses, or medical purchases may not be fully matchable, if you will. The Office of the Inspector General also appears to contradict the US Treasury when public health and safety payroll expenses expected to exceed $325 million. That's money that would have helped Maryland balance its budget. What's the plan if the federal government rejects hundreds of millions of dollars in expenses that the state has already spent or paid?
Well, let me just say, first off, obviously, when the federal government is not sending a clear message on what can and can't be done, in and of itself is a tremendous problem. As much as we appreciate the assistance and the help that is could end up costing us more in the long run, isn't the help we kind of need. The bottom line is that we don't, I mean, at least to the best of my knowledge, at least at this point in time, have a plan per se. The reality is that all that money affects our bottom line general fund. And if we somehow are told at some point with absolute certainty that it can't be used in certain ways, then we just have a bigger hole to fill. I mean, that's the simple answer, and we'll have to figure out to fill it. We will, because that's what we do. That's our job. But it certainly doesn't make it any easier having that level of uncertainty out there.
You know, that's what caused me pause when I heard that question. And I know that Chairwoman McIntosh touched upon, well, in her phrase, COVID hit after things were going along pretty well. But if the federal government reneges, and I use that for lack of a better term, on approving expenses that can be paid with those with the federal money, which programs are at risk, Madam Chair?
I mean, that is when we really sit down and prioritize. As a matter of fact, and the priorities have to be shaped by what our experience now, I have to say. So, you know, I would say, you know, we'll probably come up with education. I mean, Senator mentioned mental health. Oh my goodness. I mean, if that's something that isn't highlighted now by our experience with this pandemic, the need for good mental health services. I mean, public safety is always going to be, I think, public health, public safety, including mental health, education. I mean, everybody has something that's their priority, but I think generally those float to the top. But I will say this, that one, I don't think Guy and I, either one, are going to run for Congress, but because we like what we're doing, by the way. But I will say that we must put pressure on our federal delegation. And I know they're all in support of getting state and local governments help, and we must continue to do that. That has to be, I think, part of the equation. If it's not, it will force all states, not just this state, all states to make draconian cuts to very important programs. And, and I think most states will protect education, health, public safety, those kinds of programs. But I will tell you that it also forces us into a situation where we may have to look at raising revenue to cover the gap, because I think there is this point at which, as we saw in 2007, 8, and 9, where people just said, no, we don't want to make those cuts. And citizens don't want us to make those cuts. We have to raise revenue.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, we've had several more questions to ask, but our time is running very, very short. But I do want to thank all of you, Chairman Gazzoni, Chairman McIntosh, Delegate Beitzel, for taking time out, because I know that your phone is ringing off the hook with constituent questions and problems that are arising day to day. So we're going to ask that each of you give our many viewers today, who we've had a great response to this particular program, if you would make a few closing remarks in parting. But again, our appreciation from Old Line Government Affairs and Nemphos Braille. We want to thank you very much for your time. We can't tell you how this has been fascinating. Can't tell you how appreciative we are. Thank you.
You want me to lead off, since
Absolutely.
I was catching my breath at the beginning?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You're on a roll.
Thank you. And it's always great to be with my colleague from Western Maryland, and certainly the chair of Budget and Tax, Senator Gazzoni, who, by the way, learned everything he knows about the budget and the Appropriations Committee under great leadership at the time. I just think what's important is I hope you hear us convey to you that we are going to be entering this session under very kind of uncertain times that we can't even predict right now as we speak to you. But I do want you to feel assured that maybe not in person, but through digital platforms, through phone, through whatever mechanism, you will have access to those of us who serve Maryland and serve the public, because interaction with the public, interaction with you is very important in that process. So I want you to know that each of us is going to work to make sure that you have access and can communicate with us about issues that you care about. Know that I think, when Senator Gazzoni said, what are the priorities? He said everything. I mean, one of the, and that's not dodging it. It is true. The way the legislature works is really an amazing organization that does hear and listen to perspectives from every part of the state. And we do try to work on coming together in consensus around so many big issues. But this is an unusual time, and it's going to call for unusual leadership. And I do think it's in place in both the House and the Senate. And I'm just thrilled to be here and be serving as chair of appropriations and be a part of it. I thank you for inviting us today. I thank you in particular for letting me talk about some of the issues that I care deeply about. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Beitzel.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. We are living in interesting times, and in addition to the COVID situation we're dealing with, we have another little event coming up here very shortly called an election. Yeah. And the outcome of that election is going to have a big impact on the direction that we move forward with it when it comes around to the General Assembly when we're in session. I think the election is going to have an impact on the way politically we move forward as a nation, not just the state, but it will have a huge impact on how things come down from the federal government to the state. And one of the things that I've observed over the years is that when the things get tough at the federal level, they usually start looking to take things away from the state. Oh, shoot, I'm really sorry about that. I can't mute myself. So anyway, then one of the things that's really happened, at the state level, and having come from local government as Chairman Gazone also came from state government, one of the things that we've experienced at the local levels that I think in the past is that when things get tough at the state, one of the first things we look at cutting is the local government, and we've looked at that. And one of the things that's really dramatically impacted local governments has been the reduction of highway user funds, and we've been trying to restore those things over a number of years. And if we look now at the transportation situation with the way the coronavirus has shut things down, we have a huge reduction in funding for mass transit. And so we have mass transit issues where they're going to require more funding from our budget in order to keep them prioritized at a level that we can keep adequate public transportation going. But that may impact severely the amount of money that's going into our public highways. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride this far. It's going to get more interesting as we proceed into session and through session. I'm also thankful that you invited me on today. I hope I've added a little bit to this discussion. Obviously I'm in the minority when it comes to the Maryland General Assembly in the minority party, but I want to say that my colleagues, especially the two that have joined us here today, have been really fair to, I think, all the members of the minority party. We certainly have had issues, but I can tell you that I am really pleased that the way in working in appropriations that I've been treated and how we've been treated in the rural areas of the state. So I expect and can feel pretty assured that we will continue to look at the state as a whole, and that in anything that we do, whether it's having to cut the budget or whether it's having to raise revenue, that we will deal with all the residents of the state fairly throughout this process. So thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Beitzel. We appreciate your input. And now we'll switch over to Chairman Gazone, the anchorman, to close out the legislative round.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator and Brett, for putting this together. It's good being with you. Good being with all the folks who've joined us, and thank them all for tuning in. This was my first year chairing a committee. I am very grateful that in the other house, Chair McIntosh was there, because it wasn't someone of her quality, understanding, ability. I don't know that we would have had the year that we had. I really am grateful for that, and we do work very well together. I believe that that bodes well. I hope for the future, and believe for the future. And also to Delegate Beitzel, who said some kind words about us working together. It is also true that we are not Washington. We are Maryland, and Maryland, we have a tradition of bipartisanship, not without disagreement, but with the ability to work together and get things done. And I think we've proven that. I hope that that continues for many, many years into the future, because it really is just the way it ought to be. It's just as simple as that. It's the way it ought to be. We ought to just try to figure out how to make things work without. I always say to new members, do you want to make policy or do you want to make a point? Because anybody can stand up on a box and make a point. But if you make policy, you have to really work together, understand one another. And I think we do that, and I'm very proud of that. And I'll sort of end continuing sort of this optimistic note as as sort of depressing in some ways as all of this has been, and the budget has been something that has weighed on us, and the prospects of the difficulty of it all, and what may or may not get funded, who may or may not get hurt. I honestly believe, and I continue to be optimistic about our future. I believe that we'll, as a society, figure out things that we need to figure out. Vaccines will come, we will move on. And I think as all of us have stated along the way today, we need to be prepared and thinking forward about investing and ensuring that we build the society that we all want, and one that we can all be proud of. And I know that will continue to happen. And I'm really honored to be part of all the process. So thank you all.
Thank you, Senator Gazone. Mr. Chairman, we appreciate you being here, as everyone else. Brett, you want to sign us off, please?
Thanks again to the panel. Really an amazing conversation. We really appreciate your time. Also, thanks to everybody involved in putting this together, your staff, our folks internally as well. We hope everybody, the audience, enjoyed the webinar today. Invite you to join us for our upcoming program on state procurement. Follow us on social media and check out our website for details at www.oldlinelobbying.com. And with that, wish everybody a safe day, and look forward to working with you all. We'll be wearing wool socks, I'm sure, out. There's nowhere. We're waiting to talk to you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.